Nordic countries are warning of a potential attack from Russia in new guidance issued to their citizens. The region has laid out measures to ensure the public is ready for an emergency. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Nordic countries are ramping up their defences and rethinking military strategies as the threat from Russia intensifies. The shift from neutrality to enhanced security is reflected in updated advice they're distributing on what to do in case of war, cyber threats, or a possible nuclear strike.
In a region known for its calm and neutrality, the Nordic countries are breaking tradition. As war creeps closer to Europe's doorstep, citizens in Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Finland are being advised to prepare for possible military conflict. Advice is being given online and booklets distributed as the war in Ukraine changes the country's security situation. In Sweden, its pamphlet entitled "In Case of Crisis or War" has been sent to households, urging citizens to stay alert, act for resilience, and help prepare the country for an emergency. It also reflects its NATO membership and outlines the steps everyone can take.
This is a more severe tonality that is much clearer that we actually have to prepare for a worst-case scenario, a war scenario. Not that we necessarily think that there will be war. We think that's important to also include the possibility for nuclear war and for the use of nuclear bombs. Not least since Russia talks about it and sometimes almost threatens to use a nuclear bomb.
In Finland, a new website has been launched with clear instructions on how to prepare for threats. It is reminding citizens of their national defense obligation, and everyone plays an important role in defending the country. To accompany Norway's brochures on preparing for war, posters are being distributed to raise public awareness. Meanwhile, Denmark is emailing people advice and recommending they have at least 3 days of emergency supplies in case of a crisis. The North's time of neutrality appears to be over, replaced with a new era of alertness as the threat from Russia escalates. As tensions rise, will the Nordic countries' shift from neutrality to preparedness be enough to ensure their security?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Maryland in the United States is Leo Michel. He's former director for NATO policy and non-resident senior fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. In Geneva, Gunilla von Hall. She's a foreign reporter at the Swedish daily newspaper Svenska Dagbladet. Joining us from Brussels is Jamie Shea. He's a former NATO official. And here with me in the studio, I'm delighted to have Lembit Opik. He is a former Liberal Democrat MP and former chair of Estonia's all-party parliamentary group. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Gunilla, I'll come to you first. Everyone else is talking about Sweden and this pamphlet, Preparing for War. Are people in Sweden that bothered?
It seems like everyone in the world is speaking about this pamphlet. It's true. In Sweden, yes, a lot of people are speaking about it too, because it's coming at a very special time in Sweden. We have another kind of threatening situation now. We had a pandemic. We have a war next door with Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine. There's much more tension in Sweden now than it used to be, fear about what is going to happen with the conflicts around us. So it's coming in a situation where people also need to have some kind of guidance from authorities. What do we do if we have a big crisis or we even have a war? So people care. I wouldn't say they're scared. It seems like a lot of reactions are, where are the bomb shelters? And people also seem to worry about something like, what are we going to do with our pets? That was not in the former pamphlet that came 2018. And in this pamphlet, they're talking about what people should do with their cats and dogs and so forth. And that's what people talk about. And otherwise, they make lists. What should I get? What kind of food? Radio, batteries, and so forth. People discuss it, but without panic.
Leo, give us the Finnish perspective then. There's a very long border, 1,340 kilometers of a border with Russia, and a long, bloody, painful past of history. What's the Finnish perspective on all this preparation?
Well, Finland for years has had a concept of total defense, where they have a lot of agencies, in addition to the military and the Ministry of Defense, that are concerned about the resilience of the society. And this could be from a number of threats. These could be hybrid events, these could be cyber events and intrusions, and things even as the Russians have done from time to time, is to force immigrants over the border to threaten Finland in that way. So there have been, there's a history of concern about this in Finland, but I think the recent events of cables being cut between Finland and Germany, and at about the same time, a cable being an important undersea cable being cut between Sweden and Lithuania, that have certainly raised the concerns. And in the past couple of weeks, there have been government reports that have come out about this. And for those incidents, there are investigations underway.
Jamie, how much of this is scaremongering, or are people in Sweden and Finland, are they right to be worried?
Well, Enda, when I first arrived at NATO in 1980 during the Cold War, I spent a lot of my time on NATO committees dealing with these kind of things. Continuity of food, energy, water, continuity of government, medical facilities, evacuation of refugees, all of these kind of things. And when the Cold War came to an end, obviously we didn't need this so-called civil emergency planning any longer. But you're right, it's all been revived in the last couple of years. And I think it's very much the impact of the war in Ukraine, where we've seen once again in Europe what total war can mean, not just for military forces fighting on the front line, but for civilian populations. Nearly 7 million Ukrainians have been displaced outside the country. They have to be looked after. We've got many people displaced inside the country. Russia has been spending a lot of its military effort, not just attacking Ukrainian troops, but attacking energy grids, blowing up dams, trying to cause environmental damage, ruining livestock and food stocks, disrupting water supplies, and all of these kind of things. So there is a key sense, I think, not just in Sweden and Finland, which have recently joined NATO, but throughout NATO in general, that the same thing could potentially happen to NATO civilian populations in the event of a conflict. Certainly they wouldn't emerge unscathed, and therefore preparations have to start now. And some of that old civil emergency planning expertise from the Cold War has to be dusted down and revived. And I noticed, Enda, final comment in this first round, that even yesterday in Germany, Boris Pistorius, the German defense minister, was talking at a European defense ministers meeting, even in Germany, not just Sweden or Finland or the Baltic states or Poland, but Germany would try to open over 500 special shelters in underground car parks, in underground railway stations. An app would be created to inform the German population where the nearest shelter was going to be. So this sense that the civilian population has to be prepared and that those preparations have to begin now is becoming, as I said, not just an Eastern European feature of NATO, but becoming very much the NATO mainstream.
Lembas, a lot of viewers will know you as a very familiar British politician, but your family are actually Estonian and you have very, very close links to that country. Give us the Estonian perspective then on your Russian neighbours.
They're sanguine. Estonia's already been attacked in the past in a cyber attack, probably the first one in the world. And it actually brought the banking system and much of Estonia to its knees for a few days. So it's not new to be attacked. And although there wasn't a clear culprit, we can guess who it was. But the reality is this. If Estonia or the Baltic states were attacked, we're in a total war situation. Pamphlets aren't going to fix that. And my feeling is that any Russian response to what they consider to be aggression will be more subtle than that. it'll be the kind of disruption they've shown they can do before. Let's remember also that the Russian economy is growing faster than the British economy, and they're not scared about the outcome in Ukraine. So I would say that Putin will play a clever game. And in that sense, the Estonians aren't thinking there's going to be tanks rolling across that border, because they feel that although Estonia is a small country, the consequences would be catastrophic for the world. And so they're watching as onlookers, not really participants, because Estonia couldn't defend itself if the Russians came in. But they're, I suspect, expecting a deal. And it's interesting to know that an increasing proportion even of the Ukrainians want a deal, because this isn't a winnable war.
And tell me, does it impact daily life in Estonia? I mean, are there pamphlets? Is there this kind of information about preparation and being ready?
The Estonians have always been ready, because they have been invaded. They've lived through this before. And let's remember that a large proportion of not just Estonia, but the Baltic states are Russian populations. The great miracle was that no lives were lost, really, in the transition from the Soviet Union to independent Baltic states. So they've been mindful of the fact that they wouldn't have a violent retribution to the Russian population. If the Russians and the West go to war in the Baltic, then 4/10 of the victims will be Russians. And I don't think that the Estonians think that's really a player. My personal feeling, this isn't coming from Estonia, but my feeling as an Estonian, a dual citizen, is that in reality, a lot of this is posturing. And there is a propaganda game playing out here as well, which is largely to do with the 20th of January, when Donald Trump will change the game.
Gunilla, just talk to me about Swedish membership of NATO. Does that make people in Sweden feel completely reassured?
It has changed. A lot has changed. And it's because of the war in Ukraine, we were pushed to actually join now NATO. And people feel like they had no other choice. So when the war happened in Ukraine, the opinion changed dramatically, almost overnight. And now we are in NATO, and there are double feelings, I would say. One, Swedes feel we're safer now. We have NATO. We should have the whole group, Article 5, behind us if something happens, if we are attacked somehow. On the other hand, some people worry that now when we are in NATO, we will also be very much identified being with NATO, with the West. We're no longer neutral. It could also have been an advantage before to be neutral, like Switzerland. But basically, people feel that they are in safer, stronger hands in NATO. And with the situation we have now, it's a new security threat that we are facing. And there NATO plays a big role. And also, I think for this pamphlet to come out, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's really because of the war and also because of NATO. NATO is a new factor in our defense policy. And there we also have to have new instructions. What do we do as also part of NATO if the war or the crisis comes to our houses?
Leo, just on that point, how do Finns feel then recently having joined NATO as well?
Well, support, according to the public opinion polls, support for NATO membership remains quite high. I think there may have been some polls indicate a slight dip recently, but still, I think the average is about 70% of support for strong support for membership in NATO. And the membership in NATO has also caused kind of a snowball effect as well. It facilitated the conclusion of a bilateral defense cooperation agreement with the United States. So now we have in place the mechanism, speaking here as an American, former US official, we now have the mechanisms and the protocols and so forth, and are actually exercising with troops on a regular basis in Finland. So there could be a US presence in Finland, not a large permanent force there, but rotating forces that are familiar with the environment. If I may just add from my American perspective as well, the U.S., we have no longer the civil defense efforts of the Cold War era, where we had federal and state governments publishing information on how to survive a Soviet nuclear attack, and varying degrees encouraged the building and stocking of bomb shelters. I mean, I was in high school in October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we were practicing hiding under our desks in the event of a nuclear war. That's gone. But what there really is, and it's very significant over the past few years, is increased government and public concern, government at various levels, with cyber intrusions and that really threaten U.S. critical infrastructure. And the main threats here are China and Russia. So trying to defend against, first identify, defend against, and then build in resilience against those type of increasing threats against the U.S. homeland, that's been a very significant part of, particularly of the outgoing Biden administration. But I suspect that that will continue, actually, in the forthcoming Donald Trump administration.
Jamie, there's been a lot of discussion about cyber attacks by Russia, hybrid warfare against other countries. I noticed a comment by Hanno Pevkur, who is Estonia's defense minister, and he said the first step in the fight back is to attribute the acts to Russia and call them out in public. Is that the right way of going about it, that if the Russians are seen to have done something, to immediately point the finger at them?
Well, I think, yes, it is, because what we are seeing is far more sort of brazen and potentially destructive cyber attacks, but not just Russia. The United States, as Leo will know better than I, has in the last couple of days called out China. Iran was also accused by the Trump administration during the election campaign of trying to hack into the Trump campaign administration itself. So there are a range of actors, but certainly, yes, naming and shaming is now part of the game, particularly where intelligence agencies have got pretty conclusive proof that they know the origin of these attacks. Because, yes, you're right, sometimes attribution, false flags is difficult. A lot of the attacks are carried out by organized criminal organizations acting on behalf of states. But the real issue is developing a toolbox of countermeasures that would, over time, deter attacks of this type, because they would not go unpunished. And both the EU and NATO have developed these so-called response toolboxes, freezing economic assets of oligarchs, travel bans, excluding Russian diplomats, sanctions. Lots of different things can be considered. And it's a matter, Enda, of sort of trial and error over time, of seeing which of these countermeasures, right up to NATO saying that a cyber attack at a certain level could be, in fact, considered as armed aggression, the equivalent of an armed attack, if it started to kill people and cause a lot of destruction. So which of these measures will prove over time to be more effective? But I think the real problem, if I may, just one final comment here, for the hybrid warfare type, is the sheer range of operations has grown. It's not just, disinformation campaigns and propaganda or cyber attacks, as bad as they are. Leo mentioned the underwater cables that have been severed repeatedly in the Baltic Sea. We've had the jamming of GPS signals that have disrupted civilian flights. We've had sabotage operations in a number of NATO countries. Enda, you probably know, being there in London, that the big news in London over the weekend, apart from the storm, was mysterious drones flying over military bases in the UK as well. So the suite of possible disruptive operations goes from the virtual, the digital world of cyber, but right the way through to the more physical world, even assassination operations, as we've also seen in the UK, for example, with the use of the Novichok agent by Russian intelligence agents in Salisbury a couple of years ago.
Lembit, for a smaller country like Estonia, these kind of operations can have a very destabilizing effect.
Yeah, we've been talking about the cyber attack, and as I say, Estonia has the world record for being the first country to be successfully paralyzed for days by a cyber attack. I think it was something of an experiment and also a statement. And here's the point. You've just heard the list of options that an aggressor, whether it's Russia or China or North Korea, has. That's one reason that, to an extent, for Estonia, we have to find a deal. Estonia is suffering economically because its biggest trading neighbor, Russia, would conventionally put a lot of business through Estonia, which is a seaport. That's all lost at the moment, and it's compromising the Estonian population. take the sanctions against Russia. If you are rich, you fly to Istanbul, or you fly to Dubai, and you carry on. It's only the general public that's really suffering here. So for Estonia, we have to sort this out. And I said before, if there's an invasion, that's total war. And there are no winners there. It's just degrees of losing. And I would say the smart money in Estonia and elsewhere is to say, we don't want to fight our neighbours. We don't want to fight the 35% of the population in Estonia, 40% across the Baltic. That is indigenously Russian. We have to sort this out. And I think that there's a certain naivety in Western politics to pretend otherwise.
Gunilla, how much has the Ukraine war then changed the Swedish mentality?
I would say massively. It really has changed because, I mean, we always knew since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea, that there was a conflict in eastern Ukraine and it was kind of a threat, but it was far away. Now, when it came, the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, it's reported in news every day. It's topping the news almost every day. If it's not Ukraine, it's Gaza. It's Ukraine, Gaza, Ukraine, Gaza. And as was mentioned too, there have been things happening in the Baltic Sea. There has been cyber attacks. There has been things that we're not sure where it's coming from, and people very, very easily point the fingers to Russia. We have had a lot of Ukrainian refugees coming to Sweden, telling about the horrors going on. So it really changed. People are scared. They're actually, you can say, is it Russophobia? Maybe for some people, but the fear, the worry about what Russia and Putin is ready to do is there. Even though I don't think people really believe that it's going to be, you're going to have Russian soldiers in front of your door, it's going to be a military attack. No, but there could be other kinds of attacks, other kinds of aggressions, and we just need to be prepared. Now, also when we have Trump, who's going to be the new president for 4 years, and he is more friendly, has a more friendly attitude towards Putin than Biden, that also increases the worry, I think.
Leo, just on that point of being scared, would you say Finns are scared of what potentially could happen?
I wouldn't say scared. I would say certainly concerned. And this is reflected, particularly since Finland became a full member of NATO, reflected in various ways, and also not just in statements by actual government officials, but also by members of parliament and the media in general. So I think there's concern. I wouldn't say scared. Finland has a history, of course, and with the former Soviet Union, fought two very destructive wars, lost about 10% of its territory. And so there's a special sympathy, I think, that's widespread in the Finnish public for what Ukraine is going through, but also a feeling that it's important to have friends and allies. Therefore, the membership in NATO is very important. But it's also very important to keep up their national defense and, as I said, their total defense networks. And the Russians do a favor, if you will, of reminding them from time to time why it's necessary.
Jamie, just final point to you. I keep reading interviews with senior British military personnel, and they're all telling people to toughen up, get resilient, be prepared. How worried should the UK be?
Well, the UK, of course, does play host to a lot of very precious infrastructure. The City of London, the financial system, the UK, 11% of GDP. So that's obviously a potential target. I mentioned the US bases in the UK. The US also has early warning radar facilities in the UK. The US has its nuclear submarine base also up in Scotland and so on. So the UK was once described as the unsinkable aircraft carrier of transatlantic defence. And unfortunately, the UK, fortunately, it depends on your point of view, Enda, but it's just the way things have evolved. The UK has had, in recent times, rather a contentious relationship with Russia, all the more so as Russian agents, as I mentioned earlier, have been very active in the UK. So those bad political relations also, I think, mean that Russia has the UK in its sights, for example, mapping critical infrastructure, also offshore drilling platforms, cable roundtables, we've spoken about this already. But I wouldn't like to single out the UK, Enda. It's a broader problem. There isn't really a NATO country which has been immune from this kind of hybrid warfare activity. But one final word from my side is that Sweden and Finland in the alliance are a tremendous asset here for the rest of NATO, because these two Scandinavian countries have long practiced the so-called whole-of-society approach. When I was at NATO and the Finnish government sent me their national cyber coordinator, it turned out to be the CEO of Nokia, the telecommunications company. And that really showed me just how much business, civil society, NGOs, government, local mayors all work very, very closely together in Finland and Sweden to share information and help with resilience. And I think having these two countries in NATO really is going to help the rest of NATO to develop a similar whole-of-society approach, which ultimately is the answer. Because if we're going to have resilient societies, first and foremost, we're going to need resilient citizens.
Jamie, Gunilla, Leo and Limbus here in the studio with me. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye. Thank you for watching.